Hey Tarot friends, it's Dustin from Modern Metaphysicae, and today I thought we could hang out and take a trip through the Heaven and Earth Tarot by Jack Sephiroth and Jaymi Elford. This is the newest deck released by Los Garibeo, and as always, if you're interested in picking up a copy of this deck for yourself, you'll find a link to where you can purchase it down in the description box below. Down there you'll also find links to my social media, as well as a link to my personal website where you can book a reading with me, so be sure to check all that out at the end of the video when you get a chance. So let's dive into the Heaven and Earth Tarot. I have been super excited about this deck ever since it was first announced, mostly because the imagery is really beautiful. It reminds me a lot of the Darkness of Light Tarot, which is one of my all-time favorite decks. The color palette is very muted, and it's chock full of esoteric symbolism, which we all know I enjoy. So let's dive into this. The box is a pretty standard box these days. It seems like a lot of, well, I should say a couple of the major companies, so Llewellyn and Los Garibeo mostly, are doing decks and books in these set boxes. It has the magnetic closure, and it's a nice box. It's not terrible, it's not amazing, it's nothing new. On the inside you do find the guidebook, and then of course one of those terrible trays that I despise that the cards sit in. They do come wrapped. The nice thing about these trays, it seems they have learned or gotten enough complaints that they're making them differently now, so there's no more gap on any of the edges, so your cards can't like slide under the edge of the tray. The tray does come out easily, which is nice. Sometimes they've been gluing them in, which has been also not great. So the tray is improving, but it still sucks in terms of storing your cards, especially because these boxes I tend to store vertically, not horizontally, and so like on a bookshelf. And so because the cards sit just in them like this, a couple of the cards typically slide around, and then they have the risk of being damaged while moving them around. So I probably will not be housing this deck in this box for the long run. But it has a nice little lift ribbon, I guess. I don't know. These boxes, the thing about these boxes to me is it seems like they're being designed for the book and not for the deck. And to be honest with you, most of us are buying a tarot deck for the deck, not for the book. So it just seems a little counterintuitive to me from a product standpoint why the boxes and are getting so much emphasis on having these books, especially when 9 times out of 10 the book is not great, unfortunately. Now that being said, let's talk about the book. This book unfortunately falls into the category of not great. It's, I want to say it's like 150-ish pages. It is full color with its printing, as you can see. So full color pages. The major arcana each get, it looks like a page or more than a page, and then the minor arcana are all kind of squeezed into one page. Each card has different sections. So there's a section talking about the image. There's a section talking about the heavenly interpretations, the earthly interpretations, and then there's a section for questions. And then some of the cards, I think all the majors have like a transformation section. So like things that, I guess, ideas that you can sort of use to transform your life when these cards come up. Each section's okay. There's nothing mind-blowing in each one. There is a brief section in the beginning that has a table with some correspondences, and then oddly enough in the back, so there's a bunch of pages for notes. There's like 6 or 7 pages. Oddly enough in the back is the intro to tarot section, which I thought was strange to shove that all the way in the back of the book. And it's like 4 or 5 pages. It's a very brief introduction. But yeah, this book didn't blow me away. The card descriptions were nice and lovely. The interpretations were pretty standard. There was nothing mind-blowing or dramatically life-changing that I read in this book. And the biggest letdown was there is zero reference to any of the esoteric symbolism that is present within the deck itself. There's nothing about astrology. There's nothing about Kabbalah. There's nothing about associations. There's no reference to decans. There's nothing. It's a whole lot of nothing. And that really disappointed me. I think it was a very missed opportunity, because the thing that I think will attract people to this deck is the sort of esoteric quality of the artwork and the associations that are being presented on the cards. And to have a book with zero reference to any of that, I think is a huge miss. So I'm very disappointed in that. So if you're looking to get this deck for a wealth of esoteric and associative information, this book will not do that for you. That being said, though, the book was definitely a thumbs down. The deck, however, is definitely a thumbs up. Let's talk really quickly about the cardstock. These are the backs. Of course, you get these title cards, right? The backs are nice. The cardstock is on the glossy side, as you can see. It's not the glossiest cardstock I've dealt with, but it is on the glossier side, which is okay. The cards are nice and thick. The cardstock is a very nice cardstock compared to what we usually get from Los Garabaos, so thumbs up on that. The cut's really nice. It is a standard tarot size, so in terms of the size of the cards, this is from a classic Fez Moroccan deck. So as you can see, they're standard tarot size, nothing crazy there. So yeah, let's do our flip through, and then afterwards we'll come back, we'll talk about what I like about the deck, and we'll also dive into, I do want to go over a little bit how to read some of the esoteric symbolism that are on some of the titles. So stick around if you're interested in that. So this is the Heaven and Earth Tarot. So that is the Heaven and Earth Tarot. It is absolutely beautiful. Jack Sephiroth really did an amazing job of really breathing new life into some really traditional imagery. It's just absolutely breathtaking and gorgeous. I can't even begin to explain to you how beautiful this deck really is. It's a really great interpretation of the RWS. But the thing about this deck, the thing that makes this deck unique and really what attracted to me the most, is the inclusion of so many different esoteric elements. Just like here on the Fool card, we see the Tree of Life, the Kabbalic Tree of Life, represented on his tunic, right? We also have all of these different associations down here in the title, which are really interesting, right? And give new layers of meaning to the cards. Not only that, this deck does tend to very much follow the RWS system, but it leans very heavily into Thoth as well as the Golden Dawn. So it's really kind of an amalgamation of those three systems. And of course, the RWS and the Thoth came from the Golden Dawn. So it's kind of like a modern take on, putting all three of those decks into a blender and kind of blending them up with some really beautiful art. And the lack of discussion on that in the book is really what made the book just a big thumbs down for me. But the cards themselves and the deck itself is just really exceptional and exquisite, and I would still highly recommend it. Now, when this deck came out, I became inundated with a number of requests asking me how to read the symbols here at the bottom of the card. Each card has a title, and the major arcana follows the traditional RWS titles. The minor arcana uses the Golden Dawn titles. So if you're looking for what those are, these are not the Thoth titles, which a lot of people assumed they were. They are not. These are the Golden Dawn titles. And then on each of this sort of scroll of paper, you find the title as well as several glyphs, and there are quite a few more on the majors than there are on the minors, right? And so people were emailing me, what does all this mean? And I want to touch on that briefly. I'm not going to go too in-depth into that, but if you're interested in that, definitely hang out, because I'm gonna dive into that just a little bit here. So starting with the major arcana cards, right? When we're talking about the Golden Dawn system, the Golden Dawn associated the tarot both with astrology and with Kabbalah, and the traditional associations are reflected in this deck, as well as more modern associations. I think that is the thing that tripped a lot of people up. It tripped me up, to be perfectly honest, when I first looked at this deck, right? Especially like here in the Magician, right? So to break it down, and it's a little hard to see on the camera, but if you look very closely here at the top of the scroll, there are two numbers. It says 1-3, and what this represents is the path that the card sits on in the Tree of Life. So this sits between Sephiroth's 1 and 3. Then the next thing we see down here is the Hebrew letter associated with the card. And so for the Magician, we have Bet, and below that you have a pictogram of what the Hebrew letter means. So here we have a house, right, for that. So that's what those two things represent. The arrow here seemed to throw off people the most. And this took some digging for me to figure out. And then it struck me, the letters here are actually referencing the card's placement on Paul Foster Case's cube of space. So it's a sort of esoteric representation of a cube, and on the cube, he basically, like, on each of the faces, as well as above and below the cube, and on each of, like, the sides, there are associations with each of the tarot cards. So that's what that arrow is representing, is where, in this case, the magician sits in the cube of space. Then below that, we have the planetary, elemental, and zodiacal associations, as well as over here on the side. So in this case, we have Mercury, Gemini, and Virgo, and Mercury is the planetary ruler of both of these signs, right? Now, in some cases, in the more traditional system, certain cards are associated with elements, and certain cards are associated with, so for example, the Fool, right, is associated with an element as opposed to a planet, and then some signs are only represented by, some cards are only represented by astrological zodiacal signs, as opposed to planets, right? There is a reason for all of that. I'm not going to dive into it now. If you're really interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, I would highly, highly recommend grabbing T. Susan Ching's Tarot Correspondences book, because she does an exceptional job of kind of spelling a lot of this out. But the thing that will trip most people up, I think, is that that book leans into the more traditional system of astrological and Kabbalic associations, whereas this deck is taking both traditional and modern. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit more. So, you know, here with the Emperor, right, we have Aries and Mars, and then all of the corresponding associations there. So that's kind of how you read the majors, okay? Now, when we get to the minors, the aces are a little bit different. They only have 2 glyphs on the cards. So on the minors, on the left, you'll always find an elemental representation. The elemental representation is always associated with the suit. So in this case, we have the symbol for Earth, because we are talking about pentacles. And then here we have the sign for Neptune. Now, this glyph, in this instance, I think it is the association with the Sephira that the card would sit in on the Tree of Life. This is where it gets tricky, because between there's no like uniform system between all of the, well, there kind of is, but it's not laid out exactly the same between all of the cards, and it's not explained anywhere in the book. And I think that's what tripped most people up. And the fact that they didn't include that in the book blows my mind. Like, I don't understand. But basically what this is showing is, again, the elemental association with the card. So this is the Ace of Pentacles, so it's associated with the element of Earth. And then this is the Sephira that the card is associated with on the Kabbalic Tree of Life. And now, when we're talking about associations between tarot, astrology, and the Tree of Life, there are a few different systems, and I think this is where people were getting tripped up. And on the screen, you should see 3 images now. And basically, I think what the creator did here, what Jack and Jaymi did, is that they kind of mushed the more traditional system with the more modern system together, and just kind of represented all of the different associations, but didn't do a very good job of explaining that, or even really talking about why, which I thought was interesting. So when we go to look at other cards, like for example, the Two of Swords here. We'll talk about the Two of Swords. Here we have Peace, which is the Golden Dawn title for the card. And then we have the elemental symbol associated with the suit. So in this case, air, because we're swords. We're talking about swords, right? And then we have the moon in Libra, which is the decan associated with this card. And then we also have the planet, which is Uranus, which is associated with the Sephiroth. Okay, so the decans all seem to be classical. I have yet to stumble upon anything that threw me a loop there. And the Sephira associations seem to be the newer system, and I think that was kind of the tripping point for folks. At least this is my understanding. I could be completely wrong, and if I am, let me know in the comments below. So that's how you would read these, right? So air for swords, the two of swords, the decan associated with is the moon in Libra, Uranus for the Saphira on the Tree of Life that this card sits in. Okay, so when we look at, for example, the 9, now the thing is the aces, the 2s, and the 10s are the ones that are going to use the new system with the outer planets, and then the 3s through the 9s will use the old system with just the traditional astrological planets associated with the Tree of Life. So here, an example, a 9, right? Wands, so we're in the land of fire, as indicated here. The 9, which the 9 of Wands, which represents the decan of moon in Sagittarius. And then we have the moon here representing the 9th Saphira, to which this card would sit in. So, it's one of those things that can be tricky and trip a lot of people up. But that is kind of how I decoded it. And that was after sitting down with a couple of books. I sat down with T. Susan Chang's Tarot Correspondences. I also sat down with Stephen Skinner's The Complete Magician's Tables, as well as the Golden Dawn book, trying to figure out what was this for, and because it doesn't seem to be congruent with the majors. So that's kind of how you decipher those. Now, another thing I do want to point out before we end the video is that the court cards are really interesting to me in this deck. So the court cards visually follow the Thoth system, as well as symbolically on the titles. However, the way the deck arrived and the way they're titled follows the RWS, which is just fascinating to me. So what do I mean by all this? Okay. In the Thoth system, if you're not familiar, the Thoth order of court cards is Princess, which is your page, Prince, Queen, and then Knight. Okay, Knight is at the highest rank. Okay, now that being the way it is, right, in traditional sort of RWS, right, the highest position is the king. Okay, but there's an interesting thing going on here. So when we look at the majors, or sorry, the court cards, the court cards have a few things going on. So there's always elements associated with it, and then it describes the deacons down here. So basically what this is saying, and I'm not going to get into too much detail about this, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, Fortune's Wheelhouse, highly recommend. I'll put a link to that podcast down below, as well as M.M. Million's work or T. Susan Chain's work. You can learn lots about all of that through them. But basically what this is saying is that the last decan of Cancer and the first 2 decans of Leo, which is correct. And then, of course, here we have the elemental signs, right? So fire, of air, right? So going through them in order, we have fire of water for the queen, Fire of Earth for the princess, and then Fire of Fire, Fire for the knight. Okay. Now, if we order them in RWS, right, king is the highest. However, if we look at the decans and the elemental associations, the knight is the highest, right? Fire of Fire is the knight. So then it leans towards, the system leans towards the Thoth side, as well as the imagery, right? So if we look at just the images alone, specifically in the king here, the king is definitely the prince in the Thoth deck. So here we have all of the kings are in chariots, as are all of the princes in the Thoth deck, and here there's a direct echoing, right? We have the king in the chariot, the prince in the chariot, we have the sun behind his head, we have the chariot being pulled by the lion with all the fire around him, we have the same staff in his hand, right? All of the symbolism is the same, which points to the court being read as this being the prince, right? And not the highest rank, which I think is interesting. I thought it was a really clever way to basically make a deck that followed the different systems and allow the reader to pick. Although if you're not familiar with the different systems and the symbols and things like that, it might just lead you to being confused. So basically you can read it either way, right? You can read the king as being the highest ranking card in the traditional RWS interpretation of the card, right? Or you can read the knight as being the card, the highest card in the court, right? Because it's fire. So I thought that was pretty clever, the way they did that. But yeah, the deck is really fascinating. I think if you're just getting interested in esoteric tarot reading, I would actually lean away from this deck because it could cause some confusion. At the same time, it could be a really wonderful learning resource for you to learn multiple systems, right? If you want to sit there and kind of decode it and figure it all out for yourself. But I think it's a really beautiful deck. I think even if you're strictly a sort of intuitive tarot reader and you don't even ascribe to all of this, the artwork is stunning and beautiful, right? So I think it's a really wonderful deck, and I definitely highly recommend it. I think in terms of the esoteric side of the deck, I don't think the book does it justice, not even remotely close. And I do think that it's a deck and a system that is going to take some time to sort of decode and figure out, especially if you're not totally versed on all these things. I mean, I still had to look up a couple of things when I first kind of pulled it out and I was looking at things, like the magician card, and I was like, well, why is Virgo there? What's the point of Virgo? Well, Mercury rules Virgo in the new system, right? So maybe that's why. There's a couple other things. So, it took some going back and forth to sort of decode all of that. But that is my understanding of some of these choices. I'm sure I'm probably missing some stuff. I am not by any means a master at the esoteric side of tarot. I definitely say that I can say that I'm versed in it, but I'm in no way, shape, or form to the level of like M.M. Moline or T. Susan Chang, which again, if you have not checked out their books, I will link those down in the description box as well. They are invaluable if you're interested in this aspect of the tarot. So yeah, that is the Heaven and Earth Tarot. Definitely check this one out. Let me know what you think about it in the comments section below. And as always, thank you all so much for coming to hang out with me and check out another tarot deck. I hope you enjoyed this. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you did. It really helps me and the channel out, and I really appreciate each and every one of you. So as always, remember, everyone is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. So be kind, always. Bye, everybody.